Joining us now to discuss this story and its many ramifications, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Colonel, we thank you for checking in by phone today.
I'm glad I can, brother. It's great to be with you again.
Well, we just heard Nina Khrushcheva talk about the Soviet Union. I thought it was interesting she used that term. Is it fair to call this Russian Federation, at least given the aims of Vladimir Putin, a kind of neo-Soviet Union?
Well, I suppose you can, but in reality what he's trying to do is recreate the Russian Empire of Tsar Peter the Great. This would be Tsar Vladimir the Great, I suppose, if he achieves his goals. But I think his interests are more local than the global reach of the Soviet Empire. I mean, when the Soviet Union was at its peak, which is certainly the 1970s, when Jimmy Carter was our president, God help us, probably the only guy who's actually glad Barack Obama is president, that and the five guys that he released from Gitmo. Barack Obama has set new boundaries for how bad a president can be. Putin's goal, it strikes me, is to ensure that the nearest neighbors of Russia are in his hip pocket. I mean, he wants hegemony over them. He's turned them into satraps. There is no doubt that he controls a great deal of things that are important to us. He controls with a flick of a switch and turning off some valves, he can make Europe dark in an afternoon. He can control the access that we have in and out of Afghanistan. He's convinced Kyrgyzstan to close one of the major bases that we've used in the past with Afghanistan. So even if Barack Obama does the right thing after this year's hiatus of pulling troops out, it's going to be very difficult to resupply them if things go upside down in Pakistan, because of course it's landlocked except from the north, and the Chinese aren't about to let us use access from that long finger of Afghanistan that sticks out into China. And so when you look at the reality of life in that part of the world, Putin has expanded his control, or expanded the control of Russia over a lot of things that, as I say, are important to us. And unfortunately, this president has not stood up to any of this. He's not tried to rebuild NATO. He's not done anything that would assure our NATO allies. And worst of all, if you're an American ally anywhere in the world today, whether it's in Seoul, South Korea, or Manila, or Amman, Jordan, you've got to be very, very worried about what America would do for those countries if push came to shove in any of those places. And so you've got grave uncertainty among our allies. You have no respect among our adversaries. And Putin has shown that time and time again. Everybody was talking yesterday about the fact that, the Russians didn't veto a pablum resolution at the United Nations Security Council. Well, why would Putin want it? The resolution requires absolutely nothing to be done. It simply resolved that they should allow access for international inspectors. They should cooperate in this investigation. I can assure you that the guy who pushed the button and sent that SA-11 slamming into that commercial airliner, into that Boeing 777, is a Russian. You can't train somebody to use that weapon system overnight. You can't have those kinds of weapon systems in the hands of militiamen who wouldn't know how to drive the thing, much less fire the missiles from it.
So, Colonel North, you talk about, you have no doubt that whoever pushed that button is a Russian. And we talk
Yes.
about that horrible action. But in the aftermath, you speak about Vladimir Putin's control in a geopolitical sense, or at least what he plans in his region. What about the control of the aftermath and the Russian sympathizers? For example, just yesterday, the black boxes were handed over to investigators. Was this? Do you think those boxes have been tampered with? What do you think is going on in those days where, let's say, the pro-Russian separatists in the Ukraine were not allowing people in?
Well, look at proving once again my point. If Putin hadn't agreed to it, they wouldn't be coming in. I mean, it all came down to what Putin wants. So Putin is in control of the situation. If Putin had had told his ambassador at the United Nations to veto the resolution, it would have been vetoed. If he'd said no to the international inspectors, even those that are coming in to try to put bodies into body bags and refrigerated freight cars and send them to the Netherlands, if he'd said no to any of that, it wouldn't have happened. And that is my point, that Vladimir Putin is controlling the outcome of events in parts of the world that are very important to us. And unfortunately, this president has not, apparently, does not see that any of this is a threat to the United States, and ultimately it is. I mean, consider this. The missiles, the rockets that are being fired from Gaza are based on a Soviet design, built in Iran, delivered by Iran. They used to deliver a lot of this stuff through Syria, and now they didn't. All of the stuff that is now being fired up was delivered when Morsi was the head of state in Egypt. And I look, and some of the ships that delivered the concrete that was used for the bunkers were Russian ships. And so what I'm suggesting is that there are bad things happening around the world today for which Vladimir Putin is responsible and for which Barack Obama is doing nothing. I mean, consider this. On our southern border, which has now collapsed, we have a terrible relationship with Mexico. We have tens of thousands of people fleeing across our borders, many of whom are not Latin Americans. And we're looking at the prospect of Russian Navy vessels calling not just in Cuba, but in Venezuela and Nicaragua. You're looking at a rebuilding of Russian relationships in places where they haven't been for 30 years. The Russians are now equipping the Egyptian army. The Russians are in charge of making sure that what al-Assad does with his precursor chemical munitions, his weapons of mass destruction, are all being done under the auspices of the Russians. And the Russians are the ones that are telling the Iranians, look, you guys don't have to pay any attention to this so-called nuclear deal. The Americans will extend, and they did, extend the time in which we're going to allow them to discuss it, and keep the, if you will, precursor uranium refined and enriched that they can use to build a bomb. I mean, if you're Benjamin Netanyahu, you must be very, very worried about the Americans. You can't say that on the air. He can't go up. He's always been very laudatory to the U.S. government and to the Obama administration. Yes, they back our right of self-defense. But, in fact, all of this is happening because Barack Obama is a miserable failure as a head of state.
You just mentioned the situation in Israel, and you mentioned Prime Minister Netanyahu. We've got about 2 minutes left, Ali. I'm interested in your take in terms of what is transpiring with combat and boots on the ground, the IDF in Gaza. How long can Israel continue this with the specter of Iran and eventual nuclear weapons for Iran?
Well, look, the Israelis have no choice. The Israelis have to do their very best to root out as much of the military capability of Hamas to attack civilians in Israel, and they've got this chance to do it. My guess is, with Kerry now in Cairo and the things that Kerry said over the weekend, off mic or whatever, the comments that he made is a mandatory ceasefire that will be respected by all sides. Everybody keeps talking as though there hadn't been any ceasefires. There have been 3 of them. Israel has agreed to all 3 ceasefires. And it's been Hamas that broke the ceasefires and used one of the ceasefires, the second one, to attack Israel. Killed a lieutenant general in the Israeli military yesterday. I mean, this is a much more serious situation for the Israeli Defense Forces than they expected. Quite frankly, the Hamas infrastructure is far greater than I think a lot of people knew it to be. And a lot of that is because 2 years ago when I was in Israel, the Israelis were saying, we've got to have them stop delivering concrete and cement as humanitarian supplies because they're not building hospitals and schools with it. They're building bunkers and tunnels. And lo and behold, that's exactly what they've done.
Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, we will have to leave it there. We appreciate your insight and analysis. It is not a pretty picture, but we know you're the guy who can give us an unalloyed, unvarnished look at those different hotspots. We look forward to visiting with you again.
Pray that we can hire a new commander-in-chief, my friend. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. We appreciate your time. You heard from Ollie North. We're interested in your take. Why don't you tweet us your comments at Newsmax TV, hashtag America's Forum. We're coming right back.